there's no moral or legal justification of blanket pardoning of insurrectionists January 6th. There's not in any way a persuasive argument one can make. And that's true for any president, be it Biden or be it Trump. And as you know, I'm not a fan of either one of those.
Abby Phillip had a stacked panel on the latest episode of her CNN show with Dr. Cornel West, Anna Navarro, and MAGA stooge Scott Jennings to talk about a January 6th insurrectionist who was pardoned by Donald Trump and now is accused of another very serious crime. We're going to take a look at what this panel had to say on Abby Phillip's show to get the thoughts of Scott Jennings, Dr. Cornel West, and the rest. I want to share my thoughts on this as well. Let's check it out together.
A January 6th rioter who received one of the president's pardons is now charged with allegedly threatening to kill Hakeem Jeffries. Authorities say Christopher Moynihan, seen here in the Senate chamber during the attack, sent text messages to an anonymous source that said, quote, Hakeem Jeffries makes a speech in a few days in New York City. I can't allow this terrorist to live. Even if I'm hated, he must be eliminated. And I will kill him for the future. That anonymous person then tipped off the FBI. In a statement, the House Minority Leader criticized the blanket pardon that Trump gave to the January 6th defendants and said threats of violence will not stop us from showing up, standing up, and speaking up for the American people. First of all, this is scary. But second of all, it's, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a natural consequence of pardoning people in a blanket fashion, just period, the end, regardless of what they were accused of doing.
Well, first, this is absolutely horrific and disgusting, and I'm so grateful that the FBI is as impressive as they are and was able to capture this. There's a man named Alton Mills who Barack Obama pardoned, who was a violent criminal and went on to murder somebody else. No one here knows his name because the reality is we can't be held responsible for what he did after that. This is disgusting, but I think to take a bigger look at what's going on, there is in fact one party that frequently releases violent criminals and puts them back on the street, and that is the Democratic Party, who's soft on crime. There's a man, DeCarlos Brown, who was arrested 14 times and went on to murder someone. So I think that is a bigger problem that Americans are facing today. And as for Hakeem Jeffries, absolutely disgusting that somebody wanted to target him, and I'm so grateful that the FBI discovered that plot.
So a few weeks ago, rhetoric was the issue and was the source of political violence on the left. Now, here's a man who was pardoned by this president for a violent act, who then threatens a member of Congress, congressional leadership, and it's no big deal?
It is a big deal. Absolutely. It's a huge deal. The plot was foiled, and
right, but
thankfully everyone is safe.
I thought we just had this whole national conversation about rhetoric, which, by the way, I don't want to endorse that, but I'm just saying, especially on the right, that was the conversation, was that rhetoric was leading to violence. But now all of a sudden it's like, well, this is just what happens when you let people out of prison. It's just part of it.
It's not what happens, and that's why we're opposed to the soft on crime policies. Look, I'm not going to get into the pardons, whether that was a good thing or not, but it's happened.
I mean,
and
why
we can
not?
only
Why
move
can't we get into
forward
the pardons and whether
and
it
make
was
sure
good or
that the
not?
people who are dangerous criminals
but
are
isn't that
off
the
the
issue?
streets.
Isn't the issue in part whether the pardons were good or not? You mentioned, we're talking about this guy, but there were several others. Another pardoned January 6th rioter was shot and killed in a confrontation with Indiana police. A January 6th rioter who was pardoned by Trump faced child sex charges. Ex-Proud Boy Enrique Tarrio arrested on assault charges outside of the Capitol after he was pardoned. Another rioter charged with burglary in Virginia. Another rioter arrested near Obama's house and convicted on gun charges. I mean, part of the issue here is that Trump pardoned a bunch of people who were convicted in many cases for violent crimes.
And the issue is, look, first, two things. One, I think we should also commend the anonymous person who tipped off authorities. And today I also saw a story about a foiled plot in the Atlanta airport where that man's family tipped off authorities. And so the fact that we are more vigilant as a society and that people are taking the proactive action of trying to stop this and taking these threats seriously, I think is something good that we need to recognize and applaud. As you were mentioning, there's been at least 8 reported pardoned January 6th convicted felons who have been rearrested for different things. Soliciting minors, firearm possession, different things. Look, here's the problem. That really pardons are a very serious thing which should be given all the weight and consideration and deliberation. Donald Trump wanted to make a big splash with pardoning them all with a blanket pardon on his first day, the first thing he signed, the first thing he did. If time had been taken to analyze each of them individually, maybe some of these things could have been avoided. But we are where we are. There's been at least 8. It's not the first. Hopefully this will be the last.
It is a risk when you blanket pardon a group without really looking into the individuals. The same risk applies to Joe Biden, who pardoned thousands of drug criminals without looking into the individual files at the end of his administration. I don't know how many of them have reoffended. I'm sure if they haven't, some probably will because of the volume of them, and he'll be responsible for that.
Can I ask you a question about that? Are you suggesting that because Joe Biden did not personally look into each file, or because it did not go through a process? Because I'm not sure it didn't go through a process. But
I'm saying the president, it's pretty well reported that the president himself did not go through each individual case.
Sure,
and I'm just saying simply it's a risk.
You understand,
when you blanket pardon, it's a risk.
I mean, I understand that, but you understand also that there is actually a DOJ process generally that most other pardons go through.
Scott Jennings and Lydia Moynihan, their comments here are MAGA in a nutshell. The topic here is about pardons. Lydia Moynihan literally says, I don't want to talk about pardons. I want to talk about Obama. And Scott Jennings brings up Biden. On these shows like Abby Phillip show, whenever they have any of these MAGA people like Scott Jennings, they should just dub over everything that they say with just, what about Biden? What about Obama? I mean, that's all they have. Everything is, what about Biden? What about Obama? What about the Democrats? It never can be, hey, let's talk about this specific issue, what Donald Trump did. I don't want to hear, in this case, what Obama did, what Biden did. We're talking about Donald Trump in this specific issue. But they are incapable of doing that. That's their whole shtick, is yeah, but what about? It's all whataboutism with Scott Jennings and the rest of MAGA. And in terms of the pardoning itself, my view on this is they've got to rein this in. I'm sure it's never going to happen, but pardons should be for somebody goes to prison for a crime that they didn't do. You know, somebody's on death row and new DNA evidence comes out and shows, guess what? They didn't do it. This other person committed the murder. So we let that person go. Not somebody who did a crime and was convicted of it, and there's no evidence showing somebody else did the crime. They did it, like the January 6 people. There's video evidence of them going into the Capitol and doing these crimes. And then the president says, well, but they're on my side, or they're my donor, or they're my family member, or they're my friend, so I'm going to release them. That should not be what pardoning is for.
Even that process was circumvented for these January 6 rioters, and I don't think that they were
for
those.
I think in the case of the drug cases, it was, I mean, they were looking for a class of people who they thought had been simply overcharged because of the drug issue. My point is simply this. Whenever you do a large group of people and you're the president, the buck stops with you. You're ultimately responsible for what happens. I do agree it's hard to connect one thing to the other. You don't know what people are going to do. I personally have no tolerance whatsoever for people who are granted mercy in our unique way we do it and then go out and abuse that mercy. I have no tolerance for political violence. I have no tolerance for people threatening to kill anyone from Hakeem Jeffries to Brett Kavanaugh to the other kinds of things we've seen. I have no tolerance for it, and I think they ought to throw the book at him. And I don't think any more mercy ought to be forthcoming people who have abused it in the past.
Well, I'd agree with that, but that means, in fact, that there's no moral or legal justification of blanket pardoning of insurrectionists January 6th. There's not in any way a persuasive argument one can make. And that's true for any president, be it Biden or be it Trump. And as you know, I'm not a fan of either one of those because I think they're tied to war crimes in Gaza, but that's just a rich footnote. But the important thing is more than just a risk, though, brother. It is no moral and legal justification. Drop the mic.
And I think Dr. Cornel West is absolutely spot on with him saying drop the mic. Shouldn't matter if it's Donald Trump, shouldn't matter if it's Joe Biden, shouldn't matter if it's Barack Obama or any other president. Pardons should not be for giving a get out of jail free card, literally, to your political allies or your donors or your family members or just somebody that you like who committed a crime and they were convicted of it. You know, we've got George Santos, where it's a little bit different. Donald Trump commuted his sentence. But again, there seems to be no evidence that George Santos was innocent. So why would he be commuted when, I mean, even I think a lot of the Republican members of Congress admitted that this guy was a criminal. So it's just absolutely absurd. But Scott Jennings, Lydia Moynihan, any of the other MAGA people that Abby Phillip has on their show, it's like they're genetically incapable of doing anything but whataboutism. They can't stick to, okay, we're going to talk about this topic. It's about Donald Trump. I don't want to hear the words Barack Obama or Joe Biden or Democrats. We're talking about this specific issue of Donald Trump and criminals who he pardoned, criminals who in a lot of cases show no remorse at all. When they were in court, they said, oh, you know, I'm so sorry for what I did. And then some of them literally later, after they were released, said, oh, I was just lying about that. There used to be a time where there was shame in our country, where people would do a crime and then do their time and then just never talk about it again and have some actual shame and try to redeem themselves. But not with MAGA. But that's the way for Scott Jennings and the rest of MAGA. Let me know what you think about all this. Do you agree with what Scott Jennings and Lydia Moynihan, the two MAGA stooges, had to say? Or are you on the side of Dr. Cornel West, Anna Navarro, and what Abby Phillip had to say on Abby Phillip Show? Let me know in the comments what you think. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe. I am Chris on Culture, and I'll see you in the next video.